I'm Roger Salmon.
Where were you born and where did you grow up at?
I was born here in Aurora and grew up on a farm south of town.
Tell me about your parents and siblings, and how many siblings did you have?
I've got 6 brothers and sisters. Got 2 brothers and 4 sisters, and most all of them live right around here.
And where did you go to school, and what colleges did you attend when you grew up?
I went to school here at Aurora, and then I went 2 quarters at Central Community College in Hastings.
And speaking of school, were you a good student and did you enjoy it?
Did not like it. Mediocre student because I didn't like it.
So, did you do anything while you were a child that you enjoyed doing?
Mainly, I used to go fishing a lot. That was the biggest thing.
So then how old were you when then you joined the Army?
I would have been 19.
And speaking of that, tell me about your experience. Did you enlist or were you drafted?
And in November of, I was going to be drafted. My draft number was coming up, and there was 2 guys from here in town that I knew, and one from Hampton that was going to go in. And I knew I was going to have to go in about February, so I volunteered for the draft, and we were all able to go together and take basic training together.
So what do you recall your first days in service?
First days is when we got to Fort Ord, California for our basic training. It was just a lot of processing, a lot of paperwork. The big thing is wherever we went, when we got off the airplane, they were there to pick us up with a truck. And a whole bunch of people or a bunch of guys had to ride in the back of the truck to the processing part of the Fort Ord post.
And so tell me about your first boot camp training or experiences.
Well, part of that was the processing in. They issue you all your clothes. You get a haircut, they shave your head, so that was probably the most traumatic, I guess. And then go through, do the paperwork and fill out all this stuff, and then they assign you to a company, and then you're ready to basically start your training.
So you said you were assigned to the companies. Tell me more about the company you were assigned to.
It's mainly just an assignment of being in a certain group, so we work together, train together. So the drill instructor would have, I'm not sure how many people it was, but I'd say probably 30 people, maybe more. And you were assigned to him and you did what he said, and he was the one that had the training schedule for you.
So while working, did you request a specific job or were you just told what to do?
Basically just told what to do.
And what were you told to do?
As far as in the basic training?
Yes.
We had different things we had to do. I mean, you had everything from 12-mile march to 5-mile runs. You had rifle training. You had hand-to-hand combat. You had bayonet training. We had to go through gas mask training. Worked with hand grenades, and a lot of the emphasis was put on marching, learning how to march and all that.
So did you ever serve in a war?
Yes, in 1970 I was assigned to go to Vietnam. Spent right at just a year in Vietnam, from October 70 to 71, I believe it was.
How did you travel to the war zone? Tell me about that experience.
Well, I was stationed in Fort Ord, California to start with, and then I went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And then when I got my orders to go to Vietnam, I got a 30-day leave so you could come home and spend time with your family. And from there, we flew a commercial airline from Omaha to California. And then from there, it was a chartered airline, all full of all military people going to Vietnam.
So, was this your first experience in a foreign country, and what was that like?
Yes, it was the first time I'd ever been outside the United States. It was a real experience because of the different cultures and the way people lived, the transportation. I mean, you know, we see buses here and everything, but over there, they have buses. They're kind of rickety buses, but it's not uncommon for people to be standing on the bumper or sitting on top of the bus on a kind of a luggage rack, just riding up there and think nothing of it.
So, while in Vietnam, where were you stationed?
Our main post was Long Binh, which is not too far from Saigon. And our job was out in the jungle, so we'd go out there anywhere from 45 to 60 days, and then we'd come back in for approximately 30 days to get equipment rebuilt and back in order.
So, what was your unit or ship named while you were in Vietnam?
I was in the engineers. It was a land clearing company. We had 30 D7 Caterpillars, and we'd just go out and knock the jungle down. The biggest reason for doing that is the North Vietnamese would bring all their supplies in, and they would basically be carrying them in either by person or with a cart. And they had these trails going through the jungle, and from the air you could not see where these trails were or where the people were. So they had the engineers go out and knock all the jungle, all the trees, bamboo, all the banana trees, that kind of thing, knock it down and clear it so they could see the enemy trails. And over there, I was not doing the land clearing itself. I was more in the maintenance part of it, keeping them running, which was a big job because it was real common for these dozers to get out and hit landmines or booby traps, all kinds of rockets. So they'd do a lot of damage to them.
How was your unit organized, and explain how that was?
Well, basically our company, there you have a brigade or battalion, and then you have separate companies under that. You have what they call a headquarters company, is where it's more of an administrative thing. They did paperwork and that type of thing, and then we had two other units or two other companies. I was in the 60th Engineers, and the other one was the 984th. And by the time I got over there, had been three, but they combined two of them because they were scaling down the war. But we had basically three different groups out in the jungle. One was the maintenance, one was the operators that operated the dozers, and the other was basically the mess hall or kitchen help. And we probably really didn't intermingle with each other very much because everybody had their own jobs, and just everybody did their own thing to keep things going. But first thing in the morning every day, the dozers would get going about daybreak, and they would go out and work almost till dark that night. And then when they come back in, part of my job was to supply all of them with diesel fuel, and all our supplies had come in by air, and I had to get the diesel fuel in big rubber bladders and hold them up to where they could fill up all these dozers, which took a lot of fuel every day.
So tell me about your other job duties that you did in Vietnam.
A lot of times, all the food and everything, like I said, would come in by helicopter, and we very seldom ever got any ice. We used to get pallets of pop and other food supplies, and my job was to take it where it's supposed to go and make sure that the people that were supposed to get it got it. And then in maintenance, I had to do a lot of heavy lifting with it was a light track vehicle that I run, and it's like a big wrecker, except instead of tires, it had big tracks on it. And we lifted a lot of the parts and stuff. They always was having radiators ruined by shrapnel and stuff, and so we was always using it to pick radiators up and move them around, and all the damaged parts, if it wasn't repairable, would get sent by helicopter back to our main base camp. And so I had to hook stuff up, the slings, and hook that type of thing up to the helicopters, and just kind of working in, might say, supply also.
So while in Vietnam and when you ran the wrecker, did you ever get to see the front lines, or were you ever a part of the front lines?
Didn't really see what you would call a front line. I was only encountered directly with it one time, and the dozers were out cleaning this jungle down, and they stumbled onto an underground hospital, and the North Vietnamese didn't want to give that up, and so they put up a big fight, and we called in artillery, and they had some bombers come in and drop some bombs on it, and they were short on people out there, so they came, and I ended up having to go out with another piece of equipment with another guy, and we had a 50 caliber machine gun on top of this, and the other guy that was with me run the machine gun, and I drove, and we'd go into this area and we'd get fired at. So then you get real hot and heavy, so then you'd back up, and they'd let the artillery drop some rounds in, or some bombs come in. Gunships, some helicopter gunships would fire rockets into the area, and then we'd go in again and try and penetrate the area. And the guy that was with me did get shot. I don't know whatever happened to him, but he was sitting probably 4 foot away from me. And after he got shot, we got out, and we got him down and into a helicopter, and that's the last I seen of him. So I don't know if he lived or anything about it.
So what'd you do after your friend got shot? Did you keep going, or did you just turn around, or what happened after?
At that point, I think things were cooling off, and they pretty much got control of the area, and the North Vietnamese kind of split, and I would imagine they took off in tunnels underground, and so I went back to where they call it an NDP, which stands for Night Defensive Position. It's an area where we basically set up camp for a number of days.
So while in Vietnam, did you ever hear or see the enemy? And if you did, tell me about that experience.
The bad thing about Vietnam is you couldn't tell by looking who was the enemy and who was on your side. The North Vietnamese and South Vietnamese dress the same, and a lot of South Vietnamese army people carried guns too, so it was really hard to know one from the other.
Tell me about your best friends that you came across in Vietnam?
Probably the best friend that I come across would be a kid from South Dakota. He was there when I got there and had been there just a couple of months. But he was in maintenance also, and we got to working together side by side. We sat in the same tent, or lived in the same tent together, and just basically did everything, worked together all the time, and he got out a couple, 3 months before I did, and came back home and back to his same area where he grew up in South Dakota. And when I come back, I met my wife Judy, and come to find out, she grew up within about 15 miles from where this guy lived, and had a few things in common. Just they didn't really know each other, but they come from the same area, South Dakota.
So when you came back, did you ever have contact with him again?
We've had contact a few times. He's been down here one time and stayed. I went up there, not too long after we got out of the service, and visited him. But we have talked off and on, but not too much.
So going back to Vietnam, what was your most frightening experience while being there?
Probably like I think we talked about earlier, when they discovered an underground hospital out in the jungle, and literally having a glass windshield between me and the enemy, and they were shooting at us, and the other guy with me did get shot. So I think that was probably the most terrifying time. Another time would be at night. A lot of times we'd have a mortar attack, rockets and mortars, and you never know where they're going to land, and so that was kind of scary too.
And so when you would stumble across these attacks or get attacked, how long would they last for?
A lot of times they weren't very long. They were maybe 15, 20, 30 minutes, and then it would stop. I think they just kind of like a hit and run type thing. They wanted to surprise you, and if they got some casualties that way, then that just is all the better for them. But they didn't mess around for a long period of time where we were at. They just kind of hit and run.
What was your most interesting experience while being there?
Probably the living conditions and the culture that the South Vietnamese live in. Little kids would come up the side of the road and beg for food and see rations, and we don't see that around here. There's a lot of poverty here, but not anything like what was over there.
While in Vietnam, what was your most exhausting experience?
Probably during the rainy season. When you work out in the rain and the mud, you can imagine what it would be like to walk through an area basically where you're working and having mud ankle to knee deep, and you have to walk through that to get from one place to the other, from your tent to wherever your job was. It just really wears you out, and we put in a lot of long days, so during the rainy season that was probably the toughest.
So going off that, what was the most exciting experience?
Well, everybody counted down the days until you could come home, and a lot of times people counting down the days, a lot of them, or I shouldn't say a lot of them, but there's a lot of them that really got shot or killed and just had very few days left. And so when you count down the days, you're kind of cautious about bragging about it too much. You're anxious to go home, but it's kind of frightening after you see other people that you know have 30 days in country left and get shot or injured that way.
So what was it like coming home from Vietnam?
It was pretty exciting. The flight was a real long flight again, just like going over, but going over, you didn't know what you were going to get into, didn't know what it was going to be like being over there. When you came home, it was kind of like you were going to have some freedom again, be able to come and go and see your friends and family.
So when you came home, was there any kind of homecoming or was anyone waiting for you when you arrived?
No, there really wasn't any homecoming. That was the part of the Vietnam War, is there was so much protest going on about it. You really didn't want to tell too many people that you were coming home from Vietnam, because it was such a controversial war that they didn't have a lot of homecoming welcomes.
So did you see any protesters when you came home?
We saw a few, mainly out in California. Back here in Nebraska, no, I can't think we'd seen any.
So while in Vietnam, were you awarded any medals or citations?
I got a Bronze Star and a couple of others. I don't remember which. One of them was a Vietnam Service Medal.
And how did you achieve those awards?
Well, the Bronze Star is for doing a good job at the job you was assigned, and just getting things done when they needed to be done. Just overall a good job.
And were there any kind of promotions that you would receive, and how did you get those promotions?
A lot of times the promotions in Vietnam are just kind of political, really. Each company or each battalion had so many slots for the different grades or rank, and they would only allow you to be promoted if there was a slot open. I was a Spec 4, Specialist 4th Class, and I was up for a Spec 5, but I passed all the tests and everything that I needed to do that, but there was not a slot open, so I never did get that promotion. And a lot of the promotions is basically a pay raise, is what a lot of it boils down to.
So while you were overseas, how did you stay in touch with your family and friends back home?
Basically back then, each serviceman was allowed to call home once in that year's time by phone. And other than that, all we could do was write letters.
How long of a phone call did you guys get?
Oh, I'm not even sure on that. I don't think it was too long, maybe 5 minutes, something like that.
How did people entertain themselves while in Vietnam?
Well, we didn't have a lot of free time. When we was out in the jungle, we lived in a tent, and all we had was a lantern, I guess it was, to have light, and you didn't want to have a light on because the enemy can zero in on that light. They know there's somebody there where that light is, so you didn't want to leave that light on very long because they could zero in and put a rocket right on top of your tent. But basically what we did mainly is there was a few times we played cards, but other than that, there really wasn't too much. When we was back in Long Binh for that month, there was non-commissioned officers. I don't know whether you'd call it a room or, anyhow, they sometimes have it's live music. They have like a Vietnamese band that played back then and played the popular music that we were used to back then, and you could go into that. But that was about all. I guess there was a few places where I saw people playing basketball and that kind of thing, but really wasn't too much we could do, but we didn't have a lot of free time, so.
Do you recall the day your service ended?
Somewhat. It kind of, when we got back, we come into an air base there in California, and then we had to go through a bunch of processing. And then, if I remember right, I got to fly back from San Francisco, California, back to Omaha, and some friends picked me up there.
Did you bring any pictures or gifts back to your family from Vietnam?
I got a bunch of pictures that I'd taken. A lot of people would send back, back then, the big thing was a reel-to-reel tape recorder, big stereo systems. I don't know why, but I was in a store on the post at one time, and it was a handcrafted furniture store. And I saw a coffee table and an end table set that just caught my eye, and we were allowed to send back, I believe it was up to 250 pounds of whatever gifts or souvenirs or whatever, and it was free of charge. So I ended up buying a coffee table and 2 end tables that were hand carved and sent them back home.
What do you think people today should know about what you went through, or what do we need to remember about your war?
Well, it was in my thinking, it was kind of a wasteful, a lot of lives were lost for really not a big reason. We ended up basically losing the war because North Vietnam took over the South, so it's now all a communist country. And so it's kind of disheartening to know that you went over there and thousands of other people went over there and lost their lives, and basically for nothing.